I would also like to express my gratitude for all of you coming here today. You have all played a role in my life in one way or another, and so just thank you for taking time to walk across campus and be in the room today or drive from Minnesota. I really, really appreciate it. And then again, thank you, Dr. Luters, just for your guidance and help. She played a big role in the completion of this project and guiding me through. So thank you again. So to get started, this project is titled An Examination of Agricultural Curriculum Resources Across Nebraska's Rural and Urban School Districts. That's what we'll go ahead and dive into today. So to get started, this is an outline of kind of how a research project works, how I approached it, and then what we'll be discussing today. So first we'll go over an introduction of kind of who I am and why the agricultural industry is important, first steps on creating a research project and looking at project idea ideation and looking how we see that through. Next, I decided to send out a survey. We'll talk about what's in that survey and then go into results of what it means for us and with a discussion on what matters for resources and teachers in the state of Nebraska. And then lastly, like Dr. Luter said, moving forward, how I'll be taking this research into the real world and applying it in the industry. So to start off with an introduction, the agricultural industry is super important because it's the industry that puts clothes on your back and food on the table. And that's why it matters to all of you. It matters a little bit more to me because it has been a part of my life from preschool to college graduation. And so here on this first picture, you will see this is a picture of me in my preschool classroom with our class pet. And obviously growing up on the farm, I was surrounded by animals all the time and was learning the fundamentals of the industry. But this is the first time that we got to experience taking care of something in the classroom, and that started day one in preschool. Then kind of going through middle school to high school, that's when I was introduced to FFA. If you don't know, FFA was formerly known as the National Future Farmers of America, and so I was very involved in that, advocating for agriculture, teaching freshmen what it meant to get involved and how they can grow within the industry through freshman to as a high school senior. So that was my involvement in FFA and really desired a passion for speaking about agriculture and advocating for those that aren't connected to the industry, maybe by living on a farm or otherwise. And then lastly, that leads me to my time here at Wayne State College. Many of you know I'm a senior majoring in agricultural communications and leadership with a minor in business, and that led me to have an internship with the National Corn Growers Association, and there I served as a communications and investor relations intern. So like I expressed, agriculture is important to all of you because it drives our nation, but it's important to me because I have a personal connection to it and was raised within it. We can see that agricultural education was important because it grows agricultural literacy, and that's the students' comprehension of understanding the industry so they know what they're eating when food's on the table, they know what type of meat they're eating and where it comes from. And so agricultural literacy is the comprehension that we understand today. Kind of going into the first steps of this research project, we know the title of it, but where did this idea come from? And during my time with NCGA, I was introduced to the Kansas Corn STEM Project. Kansas Corn STEM Project is led by the Kansas Corn Commission, and farmers decided to use their checkoff dollars from corn to invest in research and areas of education and market promotion. And so these corn checkoff dollars are creating education for students across the state of Kansas. And one of the speakers I listened to shared that they were finding that a lot of their free programming was going to urban school districts because the urban school districts didn't have the same resources that the rural school districts did. And so I was wondering, is there a gap that exists in the state of Nebraska where urban school districts are needing more ag education similar to the way they're needing it in Kansas? That kind of led me to the idea of this project and investigating that in the state of Nebraska. When looking at some core values, I wanted to really hit hard on in this research was accessibility. Do farmers and students have access? We good? Okay. Do farmers and students have access to the education that they're needing? And can I get access to the educators that I want to listen to and hear their thoughts and opinions from? Next, do teachers feel like they can be honest when answering on this survey? The way that Dr. Luters and I decided to approach that was by not asking them for their name, but rather just the location of their school districts. And maybe you could say that we could find out who answered the survey by that, but that's not what we were looking for. We were looking at their location. Is it rural or urban, and how does that affect their responses? And then lastly, I wanted to look at a specific audience, specifically ag educators in the state of Nebraska. So, knowing those things, getting the idea, I knew that I would be working with educators and human subjects, and that means I needed IRB approval. IRB is the Institutional Review Board, and they ensure that ethical treatment, participant safety, and regulatory compliance is met when sending out a survey or working with a human subject. And so we went through the IRB approval, and we were well on our way to collecting this research. When thinking about a framework of how we wanted to put together our survey, these three theories kind of led our literary review and the compilation of our survey. First, kind of already hit on agricultural literacy, but it emphasizes the importance of providing students with knowledge and skills to understand the industry and all aspects of the industry. That's super important in ag education. We want to make sure that what we're teaching our students is being consumed and understood. Next, experiential learning, kind of using hands-on education. And why is that important? That's important in the ag industry because when we think about the classes that students are taking, they're taking agronomy. It's going to be different if a student's watching a video of someone planting in a field versus having an FFA greenhouse accessible to them or a community garden. So experiential learning is super important in those ag classrooms. And then lastly, educational equity, making sure that our students are getting equal access to education no matter where they are in the state. And so these three theories drove our research. I won't hit on this too much, but agriculture in America has faced many changes, and it continues to face changes daily that we're having to adapt to. And so, furthermore than that basic research question of navigating the differences between urban and rural school districts, we broke those down into three research questions that we could answer throughout our survey. And these were three that we were kind of interested in. I was really curious about, with the ever-changing agricultural environment, how are teachers adapting to that and really pushing through? And do they have the resources to keep updating their education material as the environment is changing? So we know where the idea stemmed from. We have the framework. Now we went to go ahead and write the survey. We were asking simple questions like who, what, when, where, why, and how. And that's what we really wanted to focus on. And so these are just three examples of kind of the questions that we were asking and how we answered them. So first, who were we going to send this to? I found information from the Nebraska FFA State Directory. This has all of the ag educators in Nebraska that have FFA programs. Realizing that this list is limited to the schools that do have FFA programs, but that is the resource that we had available to us. Now I did have to connect and request access with Nebraska FFA state staff, but they went ahead and gave me the go-ahead once they heard my story, and we were well on our way. Then we went ahead and asked what we want to include in the survey. When we go through our 5 themes that we discovered, we'll kind of go over these subjects, but you can go ahead and read yourself that list of 4. Those are things we were wanting to ask in our survey. And then lastly, when, like I said, I got that IRB approval last semester, we sent out our first survey in November, right before Christmas break, so that way educators would have time to fill it out thoughtfully. And then we sent out the same survey again in January when they got back from break to get a few more responses and see what else we could learn. And then these last few months, I've been working on processing all of that data, putting it all together, and seeing how we comprehend that data. All right, now we'll get into the results. I put together some graphics for you all, so it's kind of easier to see the statistics. But this is the quantitative data that we collected, so we want to understand who's taking the survey and where they're coming from. What I really love about this is the picture on the right of the state of Nebraska. I think the responses did a really good job of covering the whole state. Maybe we could have had more in the West, but we know that's not as populated over there anyway, so it works out pretty well. As you can see, we only had 1 urban school district respond and 2 suburban, and so that's where we kind of ran into the issue of like, okay, maybe if we had a bigger amount of responses, we could have had more urban school districts. But also, does this data speak for itself? Maybe urban school districts aren't as communicative with state staff. Maybe they don't have FFA programs. And so that's something that people can do when they go into further research. But working with what we have, this is kind of what we landed on. And so this next one, I just really love this chart because it shows just the diversity in age that we did get. I think it's easy to say that maybe younger educators are filling out surveys more, but hey, this data shows that we got a very good age range, and so I just really like highlighting that. I think that really went over well. All right, like I said, we have 5 themes that we pulled from our research, and we decided to go with the thematic analysis because it's a really great way to combine quantitative data and qualitative data. So the qualitative data are those responses, those natural feelings and opinions that are coming out of our respondents when they reply to a survey. And it really gives us, invites us into their perceptions, motivations, or underlying reasons as to why they behave the way they do in and outside of the classroom. So we'll dive into those now. This first theme really answers our big question. We asked people, do you feel rural and urban students have equal access to agricultural education opportunities in the state of Nebraska? And over 50% said no. So that kind of verified this assumption that maybe we do have a gap we need to close. And these next 4 themes are gonna not answer that question because, like I said, we didn't get enough responses from the urban school districts, but will give us some clarity into maybe gaps that we can even be filling in rural school districts as well. And we'll hear from our educators through these quotes. So like I said, that first theme is, yes, there is a perceived disparity between rural and urban school districts. One of our educators said, fundraising for FFA is not a problem, but fundraising for my classroom is difficult. And I think this is really great because I spent many years in FFA, and we know that community typically comes around an FFA chapter when it's led well and the students are involved. But, like again, if an urban school district doesn't have an FFA chapter and the only funding they have is going towards their classroom, maybe it's going to be a little more difficult to have a successful program there. Now, kind of going into the perceived gaps that we maybe need to address that could indirectly or directly result in urban and rural school districts having a little bit different education. First, we found that yes, there is an emphasis on experiential learning, and educators care about this. When we asked how often do students participate in hands-on agricultural activities, over 60% said daily, and over 36% said weekly, making almost 100% of our classrooms working with their hands on a weekly basis. We know that that's super important. And we also asked our educators, what does it take for you to do this successfully, and what hinders you from doing this successfully? And we found that facilities and time were both contributors to whether they were able to do this well or not well. This teacher said, I have 3 little kids at home. My husband works full-time and farms row crop, so being able to dedicate time is hard these days. We can see that this factor specifically for this teacher is limiting them from being able to produce, create, and have the time to make hands-on activities for their students. So maybe they have the resources, but this specific teacher does not have the time to do that, maybe daily like others do. Next theme we have is structural and administrative constraints. So this was actually way more prevalent than I thought. My experience in FFA is that I have definitely had advisors that are easier to work with and harder to work with. So I understand that from an educational perspective there, but really administrative, like principles and state standards, can hinder these teachers from succeeding. And other research shows that district and school administration, colleagues, and financial support are statistically significant contributors to a teacher's job satisfaction. So if a teacher is not satisfied with their job, are they willing to perform well in the classroom? And that's kind of what we heard from our educators. First, we have a teacher that said non-supportive administration makes it hard to teach effectively, for sure. And then on the other hand, supportive administration that trusts me to build a curriculum that fits the agriculture area makes my teaching more effective. I don't want to highlight that part of that quote that says that fits the agriculture area. Not every area in Nebraska or nationwide needs the same education. We want to make sure that the education is equal opportunity, so the students have the same accessibility to it, and the educators can teach what they want to teach based on the location that they're at. And I think that's super important. All right, the next theme that we found was a reliance on self-sourced curriculum materials. As you can see, that was me teaching some of our students in FFA when I was a regional president for the state of Minnesota. And, you know, if any of you know the stereotype of a farmer, you maybe know that they're a little hard-headed, and they do choose to rely on themselves a lot. And we saw this as a very common theme when answering this question. We found that a lot of these educators' material was either self-sourced, collaborating with others, which that teacher then also self-sourced their material, or online through a few of the resources that are coming out through state FFA. This teacher had a more negative experience, saying that a lot of our curriculum is updated by me from our outdated books. Kind of just hard to hear that they're still using outdated books, especially when the industry is so ever-changing. And our last theme we have is educator commitment as a compensatory mechanism, meaning that educators are compensating for what they don't have in certain areas instead of finding solutions for what they need to have. And we see that educators say this person is compensating by using their farming background and their God-given ability to present information in an educational manner. So maybe they're not relying on the resources they were given or the education they were given, but rather just their God-given ability to present, which is great, but also doesn't provide consistency across the state. And then next, a lack of knowledge on my part, a grumpy wife, and personal quit. And yep, that was an answer. All right, so now we've talked about the 5 themes, talked about the literary review, and we just want to share that existing research, it aligns with what we found. We know that these are issues, and we now know that there's a perceived gap between rural and urban education. And so where do we go from there? Like I said, some of the shortcomings of this research is that we didn't have enough responses from urban school districts. But we definitely, like Dr. Luderson and I, felt really happy with the responses we got. Considering this was undergraduate research and surveys aren't the most fun thing to take, we felt pretty good about the responses we got and what we were able to find based on what we put out there. And then just some recommendations if someone wants to go further in this research, expanding the sample size, and then maybe giving an exam to those graduating students and evaluating their agricultural literacy and comparing those grades based on region in the state of Nebraska. I think that would be really interesting to see if there's research on that. And then lastly, expanding ag education at Wayne State College. There are some state regulations and standards that we have to work around, but I think it would be really awesome just to have a few classes here and there that really highlight ag education or ag in general. Like I said, at the end of my paper, I put a little section for discussion. So we hit all 3 people groups with state leaders, educators, and students, and I gave each of them 5 questions that they can start asking themselves based on what we found through this research. Those are some examples of those questions, and we really just want to promote people actually talking about this in the classroom and not relying on themselves to get through these problems, but using the resources that they have. And lastly, I'd just like to share that I am going to be working at Frontier Cooperative in Lincoln, Nebraska as a communications and marketing specialist. And I'm super excited that this research has led me to this position and has really founded an area that I know that I can work on my own to solve problems and just use the education I've got here at Wayne State to go on like we're supposed to at graduation. So thank you all for your attention today.